Hello, my name is Cody. I have bought over 50 units in the last 5 years, and this formula is how I've done my underwriting for running numbers on rental properties to see if they're going to cash flow. Now, of course, there's always extenuating circumstances where these numbers can change, but at a baseline breakdown, this is what it looks like. You take your gross rents, less your mortgage, taxes, and insurance, and a 40% expense ratio. And what an expense ratio is, it's an allocation of dollars that go towards things every single month that come with the owning and operating a property long term. Of course, the first 3 line items are very intuitive. Mortgage, taxes, and insurance, everybody understands what those things are. But when it comes to an expense ratio, things start to get a little bit more complicated. So what I've done is I've broken it down line by line where these different allocations exist, and I'll kind of dive into why these numbers are the way they are. So the first line item I have listed here is maintenance. And I allocate 10% of my gross rents towards this maintenance allocation. Now, I know that number can feel like a lot, but trust me, we've owned enough units over enough years that this is how the numbers actually bear out long term when it comes to operating and owning a property. So within this maintenance line item, there's a myriad of stuff that is applied. It can be anything from paint, flooring, faucets, toilets, anything that comes with the day-to-day operations of a property that may break that you need to either fix or improve over time. So let's look at this through the lens of some real numbers and kind of a sample I prepared here. So let's say you have a property that is bringing in $1,000 a month. Well, 10%, that's obviously $100 a month. Now, in your mind, that sounds like a lot of money to be allocated for maintaining a property. But just as an easy example, let's say every 5 years, you have to replace all the flooring in a property, which is not unreasonable depending on the size, the type of flooring, and the type of tenants you rent to. Well, that's around $80 a month. That means just for a flooring allocation to maintain the property quality, you're looking at $80 out of your $100 allocated on a monthly basis. So once again, I know these numbers may feel big, but I promise over the long run, if you aren't making these allocations and preparing for them, you are going to lose money. So the next line item allocation I have here is 10% towards CapEx. So what CapEx is capital expenses. So think bigger than the basic maintenance things. This is things like windows, roofs, siding, furnaces, AC, the larger ticket items that usually last a longer time on the property. And once again, I know 10% feels like a lot, but as we said in our example here, that is $100 a month. So just to use one of the base examples that come into CapEx, let's say you have a new roof that needs to get put on every 25 years, that's around $25,000. Well, if we break that down on a monthly basis, once again, you're looking at almost $80 out of your $100 a month just to go towards putting a new roof on this property. And once again, I know there are extenuating circumstances where sometimes things can last longer, you can get them done cheaper, you can bring things in-house, etc., etc. But once again, you need to make these allocations or these numbers will not bear out and you will lose money long term. The next line item is management. And now, once again, I know a lot of people self-manage, they don't think allocating for management is necessary, but a couple things pertaining to that. A, if you are self-managing and you don't have an allocation for management, that means you're going to be managing your property for free, and any money that you are making, you need to look at that through the lens of the hourly requirement to manage that property. So we always put that allocation in. And I know we self-manage our properties, but we always have this line item to make sure that we're getting compensated for our time to do the management activities. Also, long term, nobody wants to manage the properties themselves indefinitely. So unless you have this allocation, you will never be able to hand off the management of the property to someone else, or you're going to lose money. So this 10% allocation, like I said, even if you are self-managing, it is very important. The next line item on the list is vacancy. So we allocate 5% of gross rents towards this, and that includes any non-payment or any time a unit isn't occupied and rent isn't coming in. And this covers things like short turnover windows or people simply not paying rent. And once again, I know this number may feel like a lot, but I promise over the long run, it only takes a little bit of non-payment or a random month here or there where a unit isn't occupied, where this 5% number is going to hold true. And of course, every market is a little bit different, and people operate differently, where sometimes they have longer lists of tenants in waiting, so they don't have as much vacancy, or they don't have as much non-payment because of the tenant pool they're working with. But this 5% number seems to hold true for us over the long term. So the last line item on our list is a miscellaneous catch-all category. This includes things like lawyer fees when you have to make calls or emails or have forms done by them, paying an accountant to have your taxes done for these properties at the end of the year, paying for a software to manage your properties, paying for gas to go back and forth to these properties. There's a lot of small unaccounted for costs that come with owning and operating properties. And I know a 5% miscellaneous line item might feel silly, but I promise there's enough cost inputs that this will bear out true over the long term. So to go back to our example of this property rents for $1,000 a month, let's say our mortgage, taxes, and insurance are $500 a month. And with a 40% expense ratio, that is $400 a month allocated. That would leave us $100 of true cash flow at the end of the month. And like I said, I know that these numbers seem really stiff, that this expense ratio seems a lot bigger than needed, but I promise we have been doing this a long time and we keep track of the numbers and cost inputs we have. And if you're not making this allocation, you're gonna actually lose money at the end of the day. So take a good look at this, and remember, the next time you underwrite a property, use these numbers so you know if you're actually gonna cash flow on it long term.